Welcome back to Hilaal Live. Now, an auction of more than 100 of former President Nelson Mandela's personal items has been suspended. The auction, which was scheduled for the 22nd of February, to include the sale of the late statesman's ID book and several other personal items. The auction received widespread criticism and was at the heart of a litigation between the South African Heritage Resource Agency and Madiba's oldest daughter, Mwasinga Mandela. Now, joining us now from SARA is the Senior Manager for Heritage Conservation Management, Ben Mwasinga. Ben, good day. Thank you so much for joining us here on Hilaal Live. Oh, Ben, sorry about that. We can't hear you.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, and good afternoon to you and your viewers.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Ben, let's speak about this auction that, of course, has been put to the stop because, of course, you guys were quite heavily involved in the litigation in trying to stop this. What was the process with regards to this, given that a lot of this really does belong to former President Nelson Mandela and the reason why it needs to be preserved for future generations?
Yeah. Ultimately, this has been a process that's been going on for the last 2 years. If you do recall, there was an attempt at auctioning 29 items in 2022, which is when we were first alerted to the fact that these items have been exported to New York in the United States illegally. Following that, we then launched a court process, and there was a hearing in November 2023, and the High Court of Gauteng gave a judgment in December 2023 in favor of Dr. Mwasinga. We then proceeded to appeal that judgment, basically because we feel that that judgment would open up or allow for a large proliferation of goods leaving South Africa into foreign markets without any checks and balances. So we have appealed that decision. Subsequent to us launching that appeal, Guernsey's auction house then announced that they intended to auction more than the 29 items. I think it now came to about approximately 74. And once we were made aware of that again, we notified them that under South African law, if you appeal a decision, it suspends the previous judgment that the court gave. Therefore, to auction those items would be very irresponsible on the part of Guernsey's. So given a little bit of back and forth in the background outside of the public discourse, Guernsey's then conceded to our request, and we are, again, quite happy and satisfied that the auction has been suspended.
Ben, it seems to be a split within the Mandela family because there are some that obviously want this auction to go ahead. That must have been a challenge, and I know obviously, you know, your role from SARA is to try and make sure that there's a preservation of many of these goods. But the back and forth with the family, that must have also provided quite a stern challenge, wasn't it?
Yeah, we're not really engaged with the family. We are engaged with the intended seller, which is Dr. Mwasinga Mandela, who has partnered with Guernsey's to auction these items. I am aware of the comments that were made by some of the family members in public who have expressed their displeasure at these items going on auction. But we're not privy to the internal discussions of the Mandela family. But we are indeed engaged in this litigation with Dr. Mwasinga Mandela, who is Nelson Mandela's eldest daughter.
Ben, some would say something like an ID book, for example, it's just a material stuff. It's just a piece of, or it's a book or, paper. I don't know what the other items are, but I'm assuming that it was something that was dear to the former president. How important is something like this in the preservation for that future generation? Maybe if you can give us an idea of that, please.
Thank you. That's a very important question that you've asked, and a very good question as well. So SARA exists to identify, protect, and conserve historical artifacts and sites in South Africa so that future generations may also enjoy them. When it comes to the Green ID book, we are talking about the document, a tangible piece of evidence that the president, the former President Mandela, used to cast his first vote in the first democratic election of South Africa. Now, this is a significant part of our collective memory, of our national estate. And I think it speaks on so many levels to the development of South Africa from a colonial and apartheid state to the constitutional democracy that it is today. So items such as these, we would want to engage with the potential seller to firstly ascertain their level of significance. When you come to SARA for a permit, we will basically assess the level of significance of the item, and then we will make certain arrangements as to whether or not it can be exported. But also, if it can be exported, there are certain arrangements that we can enter into to ensure that those South Africans who are going to be born in 2032, in 2045, also have access to these resources and are also aware of the narrative of our country. So as you mentioned, the Green ID book is, of course, very significant based on my preliminary assessment. But the main issue here is that all of these items were not brought to SARA for assessment. Therefore, we couldn't determine the different levels of significance.
Ben, one final question before we end this conversation. It's suspended, you've mentioned for now. Are you expecting any other supposed litigation to come in the future in trying to force the sale of many of these of these items? Because, you know, as you mentioned, this is just for now. It's temporary. What are you foreseeing for the future in terms of this?
What we are hoping for is for the unconditional return of all of these items to South Africa. Our main contention in court was that these items were exported without a permit from SARA. Exporting these items without a permit from SARA is a violation of the National Heritage Resources Act, as well as the supporting regulations that regulate the movement of cultural goods out of South Africa. So our main objective is to have these items returned. We have now launched our application for leave to appeal the previous judgment, and we are waiting for feedback from that, from the High Court. Should we be granted leave to appeal, we do intend to take this matter to the Supreme Court of Appeal.
Ben, thank you so much for joining us here on Hilaal Live. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's Ben Mwasinga. He is the Senior Manager for Heritage Conservation and Management at the South African Heritage Resource Agency. After the break, I'll have your latest in news. Do stay tuned.